Okay, so it's 4 on the dot, so I'm going to start and we're already recording. So hello, everybody. Thank you for attending today's workshop. My name is Kama and I will be your host today alongside my coworker, Michael, who will be co-hosting for this session. We will also be having Amy assisting with technical issues. Before we jump in, there are a few housekeeping items to discuss. So if you have any questions for the presenters, please ensure that you are using the chat or Q&A feature on the bottom of your Zoom application. Our techie Amy will be helping to monitor our feed as we go along with our session. And this event will be recorded, but attendee information will be kept confidential. So let me just start sharing my screen really quickly. Okay. And so without further ado, let's jump right in. On behalf of the Pre-Health Pila Advising Center, also known as PAC, we would like to welcome you all to today's session, GRE workshop. We will be discussing all of the information you should know before taking the GRE. So here is just a presentation outline. We do have a lot to unpack today and a little under an hour to do so. So please bear with us as we try to go as in-depth as we can on the topic of the GRE. And again, on the left, you can see an outline of what we will be discussing today. The presentation given by Michael and I will be around 30 to 45 minutes long, followed by an allotted guest speaker and Q&A time. However, if we just so happen to notice a question in the chat, we may address things then. So yeah, this is just another friendly reminder that if you have any questions or concerns, please use the chat or Q&A feature. All right, so first things first, what is the GRE? The GRE stands for the Graduate Record Examination, and there is 3 main points that we like to talk about. So first of all, it is standardized. It's a standardized exam often required for graduate school admissions, and it assesses your readiness. Some examples of professional schools that will accept this is PA schools, some law schools accept this as well, and other graduate programs. Second, it is split into 3 sections to test key skills. And these skills are your analytical, verbal skills, and your quantitative skills. And then it is mostly multiple choice and computer-based MST. I will go over what MST means in the next slide, but you are being tested at around a 100 to 200 level. So if you think you're going to be tested on some super high level English or math skills, you won't. It's 100 to 200 level. Here are some other things that you should know about the GRE. So first, the registration fee is $205. When we send out the slides to you all in an email, you can click on the hyperlinks within the slide. But we do have the registration link available, and then there is a fee reduction program, which you kind of got to search for on that webpage, but it's there. Up next, we have that multi-stage testing, the MST that I was talking about earlier. So the GRE will adapt to your proficiency in the multiple choice questions. So in other words, if you think you're doing really well in the beginning, and then you notice the second section gets a little bit harder, that's because you were doing well, and it doesn't mean you're completely failing. Your score will also be scaled to account for this. It is also administered year-round, which is really great. And there are 2 testing centers on Oahu, which one being in UH Manoa. Retakes are allowed every 21 days. Some other things to know is that there is the GRE subject test, but we will not be discussing that today. We will be talking about the GRE general test. I would also like to point out that there is the paper version as well, but we're going to be focusing on the computer-based, not the paper-based. So yeah, the MST stuff would not apply to paper because they can't really, calculate, a paper can't really calculate your score. So we're just focusing on the computer-based GRE general exam today. So there are three main sections of the GRE. We're going to start with doing a section breakdown. So we have analytical writing, verbal reasoning, and quantitative reasoning. And in the next few slides, or many slides actually, we will go in depth to break down each section and subsection.
So the first section is analytical writing, which includes 2 writing tasks. Each task takes about 30 minutes each, or you're allowed 30 minutes to complete each section. And you'll be asked to analyze a provided issue and also analyze a provided argument. Something to know is that you will not need any outside information or research in order to complete this section. You will just need to have a good command of the English language and also be able to express yourself through written words. So some key skills that will help you for this section will include being able to analyze, develop a stance, clearly convey ideas, present evidence with supporting details, and to use proper English. And there is a significant difference between these 2 tasks on the screen that might not seem obvious at first. But for the first one, when you analyze an issue, you are directly analyzing the issue with the given information. However, when you're analyzing an argument, you must keep in mind the perspective of the author who wrote the argument and how their words and feelings might be subjective to the given information. So to reiterate, you are analyzing someone else's argument on an issue. Okay, so here's a helpful rubric for the analytical writing section. And I'm not going to go into each section and each number score, but the top scoring submissions are typically insightful, have a complete and complex analysis, have little to no errors, and are well organized. So you should try to keep this rubric in mind when you're doing your writing tasks or practicing the writing tasks. And on the other hand, this is what is mentioned on the lower scale of the rubric. A good general rule is to keep it simple when you're writing. Most of the time, it's better to use shorter sentences that can get your point across rather than longer sentences and structures with words that might confuse the reader. Also, keep in mind organization. So try to make sure that the ideas flow logically and that there are transition phrases where needed. And here are some other tips for analytical writing. So honestly, the best advice is to make reading more of a habit or a hobby even. So try to find something that you enjoy reading and then read frequently. This will allow you to practice more. You can also practice writing responses with writing prompts, and also try to turn off autocorrect or Grammarly when you're doing this sort of practice so that you're not relying on it too much. Also, you should be learning how to budget your time. So if you feel like you're getting caught up in a sentence or one area, try not to let it prevent you from reaching, a conclusion or from filling out the rest of the passage. Another tip is to make an outline of your ideas and also follow the rubric expectations that we talked about earlier. So some good preparatory courses that can help prepare you for this section of the GREs include English composition and writing intensive courses. Humanities and social sciences will also help to broaden your perspectives and help you with your analysis abilities. Yep. And then for the next section, this is verbal reasoning. And there are also 2 sections within this one. So you're given 30 minutes to complete each section, which has 20 questions each. There will be several different types of questions. So there will be reading comprehension, text comprehension, and sentence equivalence types. And again, please note that from here on out, the verbal reasoning and also the quantitative will be with the MST. So they follow the section level adaptive sorts of scoring and, difficulty scaling. And again, some key skills are, having an extensive vocabulary and also being able to skim the text quickly to try to pick out the general context of the passage or the sentence. So this is an example of a reading comprehension question. And based on the passage's context and the level of formal or technical language, you should be able to get a sense of who is the most likely intended audience. So in this case, you read through the explanation and then think, okay, yeah, I think visitors to a science museum would probably be given this text to learn about some sort of exhibit. And the next one, here's another type of question. This is a sentence equivalence. So you might be asked to choose between several words that may seem similar or they might be synonyms in order to complete the sentence. So in this case, either affinity or predilection could fit in. And I forgot to mention, but this section may ask you to choose more than one answer. But otherwise, for the most part, a lot of these questions are multiple choice, so you will be just asked to choose one answer. And then our last example is text completion, where you're expected to understand what are the most logical words that can complete the sentence. So pretty similar to the sentence equivalence, but in this case, you're just picking one word that makes the sentence make sense. And so here are some helpful tips again. Again, reading casually and reading often will probably be the most helpful overall in order to prepare you for this section. You can also take the practice exams and focus on learning proper grammatical structure. Another tip is to look at the entire question before reading the entire paragraph so that you already have that in mind before you get the context from the additional details. And then the last tip is to keep in mind there is typically just one choice unless otherwise stated. So although many answers seem like they fit, just go with the one that you think sounds best or sounds like it is something you would hear someone say. And then again, the preparatory courses are the same as the previous section as well.
Sorry, I was trying to figure out how to unmute my mic. So the next section will be quantitative reasoning. This is just another fancy way of saying math. So it is also 2 sections. You are given 35 minutes per section and 20 questions per section. The topics you will be tested on are essentially arithmetic, algebra, data analysis, and geometry. And the question types are quantitative comparison, multiple choice, and numeric entry. So our biggest tip overall for this section is to try to avoid using the on-screen calculator. And there are several reasons why we say this. First of all, order of operations can be tricky. A simple parentheses can completely throw off your calculation. And we have a screenshot on the left showing literally what it looks like. There is the issue of having decimals versus fractions. So say you completely calculate an entire answer, and it turns out that you are asked to ask for the answer in fraction form, not decimal form. So you just used up a lot of time. Hence the part of taking up time with that as well, along with, if it's a simple calculation you can do in your head, like, 8 times 4, then maybe using a calculator would not be the best thing. And sometimes estimation is better than calculation because some answers may be obviously wrong when you start looking at the answers. So it might be best to just estimate the answer instead of fully calculate it. Here are some examples of the quantitative reasoning questions. So first, as we said, was quantitative comparison. I found this to be a little bit different than other standardized tests that we have taken maybe in high school because of the comparison factor. So as you see that on a math problem, a squared equals b cubed. I actually did the math, so I can explain this one. There are actual integers that do fit this rule. So a could equal 8 and b could equal 4. But however, it didn't say that when they have to be different numbers. So essentially a and b could also be 1. So for this reason, D would be the best answer here. And they, again, were not asking for the answers of what A is or B is. They were asking you to compare the quantities. Next up is multiple choice. So this is pretty much similar to what an SAT or an ACT question would have been, where you would probably set up an algebraic equation and your answer would be 100. And finally is numeric entry, where you must type in your own answer. The question here, another question similar to other exams, you would set up an algebraic equation and your answer would be $5,000. $5,000. But they don't have the dollar sign, so just 5,000. Yeah. Also, one thing I forgot to mention earlier about the on-screen calculator when doing these calculations, that if you do take the paper version, you will be given a standard calculator to use. And although we said that you should try to avoid using a calculator, we meant that as much as possible. So for this numeric entry calculation, you will be dealing with decimals and dividing by decimals. So I don't think doing that in your head would be the smartest decision, especially if you have to write in your own answer. So some tips for quantitative reasoning is, again, avoid using the on-screen calculator as much as possible. You want to study or review material from previous math courses. Again, you're tested at a 100 to 200 level. So just reviewing those concepts, how to set up algebraic equations and stuff like that would greatly prepare you. You want to also eliminate answers that are obviously wrong. This will save you a lot of time. And understand what the question is asking. So going back to that quantitative comparison question, they weren't asking you what the correct answers were. They were asking you to compare the quantities. And also, if you have time, you always want to try to double check at the end. Preparatory courses for the quantitative reasoning section include basic mathematical and quantitative reasoning courses like arithmetic, algebra, geometry. To put it into UH Manoa terms, I would say that's math 140 level or before, little after, because yeah, geometry is on there too. We just didn't go over it today. But the biggest tip overall when it comes to the GRE is to take GRE practice exams. The reasons why we say this is because taking the practice exam will help you gauge your proficiency. Even if you didn't study at all, you can see where you are and how much you should be studying. It also physically and mentally prepares you. This is a longer test. It's not too long, but it's still a longer test. So you don't want to run a marathon without practicing first. You should probably take a real thing. It also helps you to learn to manage your time. As we were saying before, you have, say, X amount of questions and X amount of time, and it's not a lot of time. So definitely take those practice exams to learn time and management. And then it will also help you get familiar with a paper or computer test. So if you're intending to take the computer exam, take computer practice exams, because there is a big difference between writing on paper versus clicking, looking at a screen versus scribbling things down. So remember this slide, how we were talking about the 3 sections? Well, there's actually a 4th hidden one, and this is the experimental section. Hello, okay. So First and foremost, the experimental section is not an additional science section. We often get that question. It's not that. So what it is, though, it is one of the 4 verbal and quantitative sections that will be unscored. It will be unidentified and not labeled explicitly as experimental. It is used by test makers for future GRE exams. And because it is unidentified, you want to take all parts of the GRE seriously. So to kind of help you visualize what I'm talking about, so first we start off with the analytical tasks 1 and 2. After that is the MST part, right, of the verbal and quantitative reasoning. But any of these sections may be the experimental section, you just won't know. So say you're doing, again, really well in verbal, and then verbal reasoning 2 gets a little bit harder, and you're like, oh, it's the MST thing, it doesn't even matter. It might be the experimental section. True, but it also may not be the experimental section. You just don't know. So again, you want to take all parts of the GRE seriously. Your grade or your score will be scaled in accordance to this experimental section. Michael.
Yes. Okay, so we can head into a total time breakdown of each of the sections of the GRE. Yes. So for the 3 sections, you can see that it's kind of split into 2 tasks each. So analytical writing has 2 tasks, and then verbal reasoning and quantitative reasoning also have 2 sections each. For verbal and quantitative reasoning, there will be 20 questions in each section. And then as you can see, they give you about 30 minutes and then 35 minutes for quantitative reasoning sections. So in total, there are 3 hours and 45 minutes allowed for this exam, with the breaks in between that are offered. And we can head into scoring. So for the analytical writing section, it's scored on a scale of 0 to 6 with half-point increments. So that includes like 5.5, 4.5, and so on. For the verbal and quantitative reasoning, it's scored on a scale of 130 as a lowest score to 170 being the highest score, with 1-point increments. And it's very important to answer all questions when possible. Even if you don't know the answer, just put something down because it is multiple choice and there is a chance that you can get the correct answer. As for the score report, it should be available on your online MyGRE account within 10 to 15 days, so like 2 weeks after your test date. If you take the paper-based test, it may take a little bit longer, so within 6 weeks. This score report will include your percentile ranking, any scores from the previous 5 years, and also I guess like the transcript saying that it was sent to 4 institutions. So when you take the exam, you are asked like, do you want to send these scores to these programs or these universities? And then, yeah, so the score report will show you which universities it was sent to. Okay, and then next slide is just showing kind of a snapshot from like I guess, averages. So we can see that for quantitative reasoning and verbal reasoning, we see that most students scored about like 150 to 153-ish. And then for analytical writing, most students scored about like a 3.5. Here are some resources that we would like students to know about. So of course, we have the Pre-Health Pre-Law Advising Center that holds annual workshops and mock exam sessions. We have a GRE overview webpage where you can basically see all of this info in one webpage. And there's the lending library. So UHM students are allowed to borrow GRE test prep books for 2 weeks at a time. And then if you need to renew a book, then you can just let us know through email or Yeah. So here is, yeah, and there are also other test prep funding opportunities to either subsidize or like pay off the cost of taking the GREs, or to do like a test prep program. So there's the ASUH Student Government Graduate Test Prep Award, the GRE Fee Reduction Program, and also the Kaplan Fee Assistance Program. Yeah, and here's a list of other resources. Some of them are free to use and like free to use practice exams. Others are commercial test prep companies that have, either some sort of book with tutorials or like a training program for students to enroll in. And we would like to note that PAC does not endorse any particular test prep resource, and this is also not an exhaustive list. So there are also many other places where you can prepare for the GREs.
Okay, so at this time, our presentation's done a little bit early, but that just gives us more time for questions. So without further ado, we'd like to welcome our guest speakers, Hi'ile, who is a law student at the William S. Richardson School of Law. She took the GRE in 2017. And we also have Christopher, who is a public health grad student, and he more recently took the GRE in 2021. And just another friendly reminder, attendees, please use the Q&A feature at this time to write any questions, comments, or concerns you would like our guest speakers or us, your hosts, to address. I lost my mouse.
Okay, so while we wait for some, attendees to type in some questions, I think I have one. So when you were signing up to take the GREs, how did you decide on like which month to take it in? And did you find that taking it in that month was helpful for you, in terms of like, applying to the program that you're applying to?
I'm interested to hear what Christopher has to say after making that face. So I'll let him go first.
Oh man, look, okay, look, it's not a good thing, but never procrastinate on taking the GREs, okay? I was like, oh no, my application to grad school is due in a month, and I still have to take the GREs. And I decided to take, so I applied for it in October, took it in November, the month before it was due in December. And I did okay, but like, for me, like I was preparing, but I just forgot to sign up, and that was my fault. Don't do that. That's like $205 and a lot of anxiety. Sign up early as soon as possible and just like plan ahead of time. Okay, I would 100% recommend that.
How about you, Hi'ile? When did you take it?
Yeah, I was trying to recall the specific month. I think I aimed for end of summer because I wanted to give myself a chance to take it again if needed, which I ended up doing. So that was really good. I think my grad school apps were due around the same time, like November, December. So pretty sure I took it like at the beginning of the school year, which was kind of good timing because I didn't really have classes going on. Like it was like syllabus week. So I wasn't too worried about like getting behind in terms of, at least for me, I had to travel out of my state to find a testing center, or like they had some dispersed. I went to school in New York, so they had some dispersed, but my campus was really remote and there were no testing centers within like 5 hours of me. So I had to like make plans and accommodations to visit a friend and stay with a friend and then like Uber to my testing site. So I knew that if I wanted to take it again, I would have to do the same process. So I just gave myself enough time to figure that out, because otherwise I would have been stressing out. Yeah.
Thank you for those insights. So there was another question about, I think it may have been answered about when or where they can borrow the books. And that is through PAC, through our physical office in room 107B in Sinclair Library. You go through the front doors and it's on the right. You can't really miss it. It's along the wall. We do have rules and regulations about that, but in general, you have it for 2 weeks. not going to go through everything, but you have it for around 2 weeks and you can renew it as well. Okay, our next question from an attendee is, which section did you feel was the most challenging and how much prep did you put into the whole thing? If anybody wants to answer.
I'll answer it. So for me, it was English. I was awful with my vocabulary. I thought I would do worse on math, so I spent about 2 months studying, right? But let's break it down to weeks. 6 weeks was heavily on the math because I thought I would suck on it, but it was so much easier than the English because I didn't prioritize in English. And it's like there are so many words that you didn't know in the English vocabulary that you're wondering, why did I not, you know, prepare for this? Because I thought, English is fine. And I was like, oh, this textbook is telling me that I'm gonna do well. It wasn't. Honestly, just give yourself a lot of time on like each section. So we usually recommend, I guess, to answer the second question is, how much time should I give myself to study? 3 to 6 months is usually the packed standard, or like the standard for like a GRE and the LSAT. But overall, it also depends on your comfortability too as well. You gotta answer Hele.
Yeah, I was gonna say, just to be fun, I was the total opposite. I've always been pretty bad at math, which is why I'm in law school now. Good at reading and writing, but not so good at math. So I definitely spent more time studying that. I, still ended up not scoring as well as I feel like I should have, but also think about your graduate programs and what they value. So, I use my GRE score to get into law school, and there's no math really in law school. So I think what weighed more was my reading and writing, which were higher. So I wasn't too worried about that. So that's something to consider too. And I agree, 3 to 6 months is your best bet.
Okay, thank you. And yeah, that answers the following question, which was, how much time should I give myself to study for the GRE? 3 to 6 months is a really good time. And again, you don't have to hard study in the beginning. You can lightly study and amp it up as you get closer.
Can I interject for the previous question too as well?
Yes.
How much time? Keep in mind about when you want to apply to your health professional school, because there is spoil dates, right? And they always consider like a certain amount of years to be good or bad. So sometimes I've seen like from the website, 2 years is what they considered good on their website for like the GREs, but then just keep in mind like when you want to apply and when you should, take it as well. So you don't have to spend another $205 on the entrance examination.
Thank you. Does QLC offer the paper-based tests? Honestly, I don't really know. I did look at the GRE website and they said wherever computer-based is offered, you should ask if there's paper-based, because I don't think they would change the location. However, just keep in mind, like, I understand that some people prefer paper-based tests over computer-based, and that's completely understandable. But when it comes to these standardized tests, keep in mind your timeline, because you can take retakes every 21 days, right? But how quickly do you get your score back? And I believe for computer-based, you can take it 5 times in 1 year. But for paper-based, it's 3. So you want to keep in mind your timeline if paper versus computer is not a problem for you. Yeah, sorry, I don't really know the answer to that question. If anybody else does, please correct me.
I did some Googling. It's on like the CSDC website, but it says like testing office. And I think they offer paper-based, but only for the subject tests. Here, I can paste the link to the Q&A. Are you able to see them? It says the counseling and testing office. But they do offer the computer-based, at least through the testing office.
I do not see it, but if it's okay, we can send it in the email as well for our follow-up. Okay, any more questions from attendees? So what is considered to be a good score? Casey, would you like to take this one?
I would honestly say it depends on your program. So when I was meeting with the graduate program for public health, specifically the advisor told me the minimum you want to get 70%, but anything higher than that is better. But it all depends on your health profession too as well, right? For example, I don't know if any of you are PT prospects. They do have like we do have like the early acceptance program to Rocky Mountain, and they would require at least I think a 60 percentile to be considered good and to be considered to getting to the preferred acceptance program. So it all depends, right? I think that's the answer. It just depends on your program.
Yeah, I'm gonna second that with some friends who took the GRE before, they said they bombed it completely. And I don't know what they mean by bombed, but I'm assuming it means not very good. And they said some programs just require you to take it. They don't really care about your score. Maybe not the best to quote me on that or think about that for everything, but it truly depends on the program. Any other questions? I have a question. Do any of you have a regret when it comes to taking the GRE? Any regrets on anything?
Taking it because like it drains you. I'm not gonna lie. 4 hours of an examination and reading a lot, you're just burned out at the end of it. But it's like it was my fault too because I didn't read on the website that the GRE was optional for that application cycle. So I really didn't need to take it. Could have saved my $205. But yeah, that was my fault.
Ile, any regrets or things that you wish you knew?
Yeah, I think this is also something we preach at PAC, which is taking multiple full length practice exams before you do the real one. I didn't do that for the first one, which is why I took a second one. So just remember that you want to be prepared for the first one as much as you can, so you don't have to spend, extra money and coordination. But it's hard to like have enough discipline to sit down and do a full length practice exam by yourself, like proctoring it on your own. So to the extent that you need support or resources for that to get you to do that, I think that would be helpful and just setting that up for yourself. But I understand like it's very difficult to do that.
So we seem to have a lot of good questions about the practice exams in the chat or in the Q&A. So where can you access full-length practice exams and when is it offered? So PAC is actually having a GRE session this Saturday. I believe, yes. I think registration is still open for that. It might be closing soon though, so if you are interested, you might want to get through that ASAP. Because again, it is Saturday in the morning, I believe. Where can you access full-length practice exams? So the questions that I found that I put into the presentation were directly just from Googling things. So you can see the PDF versions of paper exams. This may, be helpful in the beginning, but I believe for additional, like maybe computer-based practice exams, you may have to pay a small fee, but a simple Google search should get you places. And the resources that we listed also have some free practice exam help and practice exams, period. So that's also a really good resource because sometimes they may cost you. And oh yeah, of those resources, the ones we have listed, those are fairly trustable and recommended. So I think Kaplan has practice exam material that we're aware of and I think is pretty trustworthy. So that might be one to check out. Are there any last few questions at all? These are great questions, guys. So proud of you guys. Okay, well, I'm going to start sharing my screen again one last time. Okay, so thank you so much, Hiile and Christopher. Your insights were truly helpful, I think, to everybody here. And yeah, any final questions, final questions? If not, oh, we do have one possibly. Oh, just kidding, we don't have one. So thank you so much to everybody for attending. Here is a list of our other workshops and webinars that we had this semester. Most of them are already passed. We do have the mock GRE coming up though on a Saturday, along with some information sessions and other webinars. But this is kind of a general overview of what PAC does offer for our workshop series each semester. After we send out the slides, you'll be able to access all of those hyperlinks that we were showing you all. And we do have the evaluation form that we would greatly appreciate if you filled out. So if there's any final questions, thank you so much for attending.